Serious, soldiers of Reddit who fought in Afghanistan, what preconceptions did you have that turned out to be completely wrong? I'd have to say this is not a perception but rather a culture shock. I was never part of any interrogations, but I was told that some of the Taliban we had been fighting believed we had force fields that were causing their weapons, most notably RPGs, to not hit us. It had nothing to do with skill of the user or the weapon's capabilities. They actually believed our technology was that superior. My perception that was completely wrong is that all the locals hate you and they want to try and kill you 24/7. As I stated, that is completely wrong, and it was the opposite of that. The local Afghan population, and ironically the Taliban, were extremely nice to us. They would rather have us there than the Taliban. Where I was stationed was the heroin capital of Afghanistan. I actually believe in the world as well. We were also told that the majority of the Taliban were from this area as well. Because of this, a lot of them didn't want to fight in their own backyards. The locals were happy with us because we kept the peace and helped them out as much as we can in a combat environment. We actually brought an economic boost for them as well. The local shop owners loved us because we would always buy monsters, pop, cigarettes, and chips off of them. We would buy food off of other locals on a weekly basis. Oh yeah, that's another perception I had that was wrong. Those suckers can cook, and I mean cook. They had the best chicken and potatoes and made the best bread. As I stated already, the Taliban soldiers didn't have a problem with us either. There are many times we would hear that the higher up Taliban leaders would call the local guys and flip the frick out on them because they aren't trying to kill us, and the local dudes would just be like, hey man, we're good. They are good. They aren't doing anything to harm us. We just want to chill. They will be gone sooner or later. I'm not joking you. That's how their conversations went. There would even be times that the Taliban were forced to do their job that they would have other local people place the IEDs and make them so freaking obvious. Like textbook IED laying so we can see it from a mile away so none of us would get hurt and they can pass it on and say they did their job. This was great to write. Thank you for asking. It's pretty rare that someone asks you anything about being in Afghanistan other than did you kill anyone. It's nice to talk about it. Was in the Tangi Valley and we had 2 of our 4 of HMMWVs broke in the middle of a town. The whole village male population came out to help us dig out our vehicles. Talking like 100-200 people who were digging and crap. Right next to us and with us. Sun went down and it started to snow. Everyone left. We got attacked that night. The villagers didn't want us there. Not because they hated us, but because they knew their mud huts were about to get fricked up in the attack that would happen that night. Christmas Eve, I think 2010. Soldiers tend to train for fighting at sub 500 meters. At least I always had. Not being able to see the enemy wasn't completely out of the norm for training, but they were usually within the effective range of our small arms. Come to Afghanistan and we were getting fired at by invisible enemies on the side of mountains a kilometer and away. We hardly knew we were getting engaged, let alone went into contact drills. When I was told I was going to Afghanistan, I was picturing mountains and all that stuff they have in the eastern part of the country. I went to southern Afghanistan. It's mostly desert, but around the rivers it's a freaking jungle. I spent many patrols wading through knee to waist deep water and mud in pomegranate and grape orchards. Most of my training leading up to deploying to Afghanistan had been geared towards urban operations and convoy operations. What I ended up doing was small, squad-sized dismounted patrols through rough terrain. Also didn't expect to be as close to the enemy as we usually were. Usually less than 50 meters was our engagement distance. That is interesting. All the Canadian soldiers I have talked to, I am Canadian, have said they rarely even saw the enemy. That must have been nuts. Their concept of food. In their culture, if anyone had food they were to share it with everyone around them. This is even if you only have enough for one person to have a snack. It was almost as if they didn't believe food could be owned by a person. Some of the Afghans I worked with would be offended if I ate anything and didn't offer them some. I guess also that I would actually be working with some Afghans. I didn't expect that to be a thing. I saw this everywhere in developing countries. People who have nothing offering everything they have. To me, it's a sense of community that we have long lost. That Afghanistan was an actual country, it's only so on a map. The people, in some of the more rural places, at least, have no concept of Afghanistan. We were in a village in northern Kandahar province, talking to some people who of course had no idea who we were or why we were there. This was in 2004. Not only had they not heard about 9/11, they hadn't heard Americans had come over. Talking to them further, they hadn't heard about that one time the Russians were in Afghanistan either. We then asked if they knew where the city of Kandahar was, which is a rather large and important city some 30 miles to the south. They'd heard of it, but no one had ever been there, and they didn't know when it was. For them, there was no Afghanistan. The concept just didn't exist. Man, I had some guy think we were still the Russians. LOL. Oh, also about the fighting we did. I had in my mind that it would be these organized ambushes against a somewhat organized force. It may have been like that for the push, Marja, but once the initial defense was scattered, the fighting turned into some farmer getting paid a year's salary to go fire an AK-47 at our patrol as we walked by. I mean, no wonder there was so much PTSD going around. It doesn't feel okay when you killed some farmer for trying to feed his kids or save his family from torture that next night. It feels like crap actually. That we would be fighting the Taliban. The majority of people we managed to detain had been coerced into shooting at us by the Mujahideen, which is made up of all sorts of people who had kidnapped or threatened their family. The most glaring example of this was when our free on board, forward operating base was attacked by a massive VBIED truck bomb that blew a hole in our wall. Suicide bombers ran into the free on board through the hole and blew themselves up in our bunkers. Every single one of them had their hands tied and remote detonation receivers, so they couldn't back out. Holy heck, you don't hear about that on the news. It really puts things in perspective. That everyone was going to be dirty and poor like in those help a poor starving child commercials. I remember being really surprised to see kids running around playing in dirt roads and everyone was clean. No dirt smudges on their face or anything. Also there were these two little girls with the most unbelievably white dresses I have ever seen standing by the side of the road watching our convoy roll by. Very surreal. Deployed in 2011, my misconception was that we were going to help the Afghans have better lives. Like user Tanner said on here, most of them just wanted to be left alone and didn't care at all about whether they had democracy or the Taliban. We would do anything we could to get people to talk to us and give us any information on the Taliban and Haqqani. Most said nothing, but some were honest. Look, what good will it do me to talk to you? You will leave soon. They will still be here. What are you going to do for me? My brother was kidnapped last week. Have any Americans been doing anything about that? Can you protect me and my family if something happens to us? Can I count on you? Of course, we would try to sound positive and helpful without making promises, and try to act like of course, we are here to help you, but protecting Afghan civilians was not the priority. Not that we would intentionally endanger them, but we would never go out of our way just to save or protect a local. Force protection is the name of the game. And I get it, it's the military, not a humanitarian NGO. Certain missions take priority, and you can't risk lives needlessly. I just thought that we might have put more effort into winning trust. There was this police chief in our AO, police chief in name only. He was effectively a warlord, who was fighting the Haqqanis because they killed his son-in-law. He literally told us if he didn't have them to fight he would fight the Americans just because we were there. I thought that interesting. That it was really a war. It's just people sustaining other people, with a lot of nothing actually getting done. As someone who was a gunner for most of my tour, we mainly did transportation missions from Kabul to the eastern province. We never saw any action, and to this day I thank God for that. The fact that a lot of my time outside of convoys was spent either sleeping, eating, or gaming surprised me, I suppose, but in the end, we're just there to provide presents, and not expected to actually accomplish anything. The amount of awards given out back in Kabul for people simply hitting a high quota of maintenance repairs threw me off too. There were times when I was looked down upon for not working every day in a shop and instead being on convoys. The worst part of it all was losing a friend to suicide after returning home safe. That was something I never expected to see happen, and it still messes with me to this day. I've been to 11 other countries during my 5 years in the Marines. Went there expecting the people to be chanting for our death and plotting nefarious acts of villainy all the time. Which, certainly, there are a few out there. For the most part though, people the world over are the same with minor outliers. Afghanis are not an exception here. They mostly just want to be left alone, tend their land and their family. They are almost exactly the same as anyone who grew up in the deep south. Just a different flavor of religion. Most interesting to me is how their history is passed down each generation. It's all word of mouth, for generation after generation, and largely focused on the wars they fought. The end result is you'll have elders in the mountains who'll swear that their great-great-grandfather fought against Alexander the Great. For the most part though, people the world over are the same with minor outliers. I wish more people actually understood this. That they had any idea why we were there. We'd ask them if they knew what 9/11 was, and they had no idea. We'd show them pictures of the WTC on fire after the planes hit, and ask them what it was. Their response was usually that it was a picture of a building the US bombed in Kabul, their capital. Kind of mind-blowing that they're being occupied by a foreign military force and have no idea why. I remember reading about the $1 million reward originally offered for Bin Laden. They asked Afghan farmers what they'd do with that much money. Most couldn't even understand the concept, and the ones who did wanted simple things like 2 goats or a balloon for their daughter. I served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. 2 BCT, 101st Airborne 2004 to 2009. One preconception I had prior to arriving was that the whole country was a crap hole. Afghanistan had some of the most beautiful landscapes and views I have ever had the pleasure of enjoying. The people there are simple, farming and hunting gathering type folk, and when introduced to money they became extremely selfish. Alright, so after 8 my first duty station was Qatar. I got there in the middle of the night, got picked up and got a room. The next day I started in processing and met with my new CO and 1SG, which is when I get informed that I won't be staying in Qatar. Instead, I will be going to Afghanistan. So there I am, 20 years old in Qatar. I don't know anyone and all I have is my uniforms and personal belongings. Getting told I'm going to Afghanistan the next day. I got my Ach and Iba that day, but was told I would get the rest of my gear including my weapon in Afghanistan. I was absolutely terrified. I was expecting crap like you see on TV where the Taliban is constantly attacking and shooting at you. I got to Bagram and it's a huge freaking airfield. Calm as can be. There are stores and restaurants and civilians everywhere and nobody gives a frick. I get to Kabul and it's the same thing. There were kids playing soccer right outside the Kabul airport, though the airport has since become more secure. I got a custom tailored suit there and even went back as a contractor after I finished my 4 years. Afghanistan was not nearly as terrifying as I thought. Kabul looked like a war-torn and impoverished featuring Collins Company. There were apartment complexes, restaurants, billboards for colleges, trucking companies, etc. Most of the LNs didn't give a frick about the war, they gave a frick about providing for themselves. However bad you think the terrain might be, it's worse. We are talking mountains, like the Rocky Mountains type terrain. Imagine trying to go to the Rockies and fight the indigenous people there. Now add on top of that the fact that you are a foreigner who doesn't know their language, customs, traditions, or jack crap about them. Now try to win their hearts and minds. Another part is how amazing the views are. The world truly is missing out on Afghanistan's beauty. It's shocking how pure and beautiful the landscape is. They have a serious tourism goldmine they are sitting on. I'm talking about Maine, the north and east of the country. Frick the south, it's just bad all around. You hear so much about how different Afghans and Afghani culture is before you go that you forget that they're just people too. The kids especially. Kids everywhere are pretty much the same. I don't feel too bad about leaving the crappy, lazy AMF guys to their fate, but I still wonder about the little kids I used to watch play from our guard tower. You have been visited by the beautiful Squidward. Comment beautiful as Squidward so that your beauty excels that of others. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.